It's the economy, stupid. That's probably one of the most famous things ever said about U.S. presidential campaigns. And James Carville made it the slogan of his operation. Carville was Bill Clinton's campaign manager, and Clinton, you'll remember, was elected twice to the White House, so maybe he was onto something. You can ask Americans what they're thinking about when the election comes around, about the issues that matter to them the most. They might talk about immigration, or they might talk about access to abortion. But remember Carville, it's the economy, stupid. Let's talk about the economy. It's chugging along. The stock market is up. Unemployment is down. Inflation under President Biden, which was the highest of any leading industrial nation, is now just about the lowest of any leading industrial nation. Gas prices, though, about $1 a liter or less in the United States, are low by the standards of other leading industrial nations, but a lot higher than when Biden took office, and Americans know it. So let's talk about the economy with business and economy expert Ryan Patel. I mean, when you look at the economy, if you took a snapshot of the U.S. economy now, what would you see?
Well, if you just looked at numbers and didn't know what the past 2 years or anything going forward, you'd say it's in pretty good shape. But when you think of the economy and where it's come and where it needs to go, we're still kind of far away to have that recovery mode from even post-pandemic, and really needs to really get to numbers where consumers are feeling that not just the wage growth in their pocket, but the actual money into their savings account.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that, because you make a really good point. A snapshot of the economy tells us one thing, but if you extended that to, say, a video or a movie of the U.S. economy before Joe Biden took office, or before the COVID epidemic, to now, what would that tell you about the way people have experienced their lives and the economy over the last few years that Biden's been president?
It's been a roller coaster if you think about it, right? When you think of the pandemic, you think about the recovery process, people are starting to get happy. Now, though, if you take a snapshot of where we sit today, you think about what people start thinking about their bank account today. They don't think about their bank account what it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. What have you done for me lately has been typically the slogan when it comes to the economy. And with that said, prices are higher. Inflation is cooling down, but most Americans haven't felt it yet because it takes time. Interest rates are still higher than normal for most Americans, meaning that they still can't borrow money, or they're still waiting on the sideline to buy a house because housing prices haven't dropped. And so when those prices still stay high, it changes the consumer behavior. And that's what Americans are seeing. Some of them that are saying the economy isn't good for them because that's what they're experiencing as of today.
Americans consistently tell pollsters that they thought the economy was better when Donald Trump was president, and that they trust Trump to handle the economy more than Joe Biden. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, I think that's more of a feeling, right? And I think when we think about the elections, you want to talk about fiscal policy. You want to think about what each side, specifically Trump, when he came in, what he promised, and what he promised for small businesses and the tax cuts. People saw that and felt it, and that's what they wanted. And I think that's where that conversation is, why you see that feeling. I think for Biden, what he needs to do is to highlight the things that they've done, maybe for different sectors in the economy, and to get it back, not just back on track because of the pandemic, but need to make it tied back to the individual. And that, I think, is what's missing.
For a while, the White House wanted to talk a lot about what they called Bidenomics, that this package of economic policies that the Biden administration introduced were really something that voters should have in mind. And then that idea seemed to have went away. It didn't sell very well. Are you surprised?
No, because guess what? People are paying attention to the shiniest thing in front of them, and that's interest rates. That's been top of mind. It's Federal Chair Jerome Powell is become a rock star every meeting. All eyes are on him when he is the leader of the U.S. fiscal policy, telling the economy what they see, what the data sees, what job employment looks like, new jobs, if you think about it, wage growth. People are all watching on what he's saying and what they're going to do with interest rates, because that will provide some relief to show that the economy is back. And if it's back, how does that really feel for the consumer wanting to spend more money?
Yeah, you're making an important point, but I'm just going to ask you to drill down a bit more on it. There's a limit to what Joe Biden can do to run the economy, I suppose. And then there's the involvement of the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is independent of the electoral system. Nobody votes for the chairman of the Fed, but more powerful than anything Joe Biden or Donald Trump can do to help ordinary people?
I mean, the U.S., the Federal Reserve is the fiscal policy arm for the U.S. government. That's what it's supposed, it is a separate entity. I think there's a couple things. I think one, setting the track of the overall gross domestic product and the economy purpose for the U.S. is what the Fed is supposed to do. It is intermixed. What I mean by that is what they dictate in policy has an effect on the economy. So if interest rates are very high, it makes businesses and even the average person want not to take more further loans, and they have to go through that higher wage growth or the pain point of prices. So that's nothing that Biden or any president can do. Now there's fiscal policy or there's policies that the administration can do that can affect taxes, incentives, specific industries, in certain, and obviously the state government as well, but not at a national level like what the Fed can do when it comes to setting the tone for the rest of the economy.
Fair enough. But Joe Biden did something most presidents don't do. He faced COVID. And during the worst of the COVID epidemic, the Biden administration spent an awful lot of money. It put money into the economy. It put money into people's pockets. And two things happened. That caused some inflation, for which he's being blamed. And also, it, in a sense, got people used to money showing up in the mail. And when the money ran out, they all of a sudden felt poorer. And are they blaming Biden for it? Is he a victim of his own success fighting the COVID economy because of the inflation it caused and because the expectations people had that the free money was just going to keep coming?
That's a great question. I would say a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I would say that argument or that conversation was very, very relevant because of when that was happening and to get to the recover process. I mean, it was, the amount of money could be up to debate, but it was definitely in need to have a boost for the economy to keep it where it needed to be to have that recovery. Now I think we're in the recovery process. I don't think most people go back and say, well, did he do the right thing or not? And maybe that comes up into conversations with the elections, but I truthfully think as of right now, it's less about what Biden has done. What Biden needs to do is to promise what it looks like for the next 2 years. However, he needs to explain what is going on right now and why it is better than before. And you mentioned the polling. That's not happening because I don't think people don't some people understand, but some people don't understand how it's working, and it's not working for them right now. So to Biden's credit, and I guess discredit, as you mentioned, he had some success, but because of inflation and because of this cash flow that was pumped into the economy, we are in this situation. But you can't let the Fed off the hook too, right? They was a little bit slow getting to that process where they thought it was transitory inflation. So I think there's many variables, not just in any president, it doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump. There's a lot of other variables that need to go right to make sure that everybody is firing on all cylinders.
When people think about Donald Trump, and somehow he gets enormous credit because he's so rich, they think he can run the economy well. Is it clear what he will do to make the U.S. economy better, to make Americans more prosperous?
I would hope that we would see a real detailed conversation about it when they get to election time. As of right now, I think it's pointing fingers on both sides of who's better, who's not. I mean, my sense would be that he would run on the same campaign that he won on. And I think going back to the tax cuts to specific businesses and industries and bringing jobs back to the U.S. But Biden's done that too, to a certain degree, on ensuring manufacturing in America stays competitive. So to me, the language actually from Biden too about making America competitive against international countries too is I don't want to say it's similar, but it's not as far apart as when Trump ran the first time.
Let me ask you, you talk to people over the dinner table, you meet people every day. Is Carville right? Is it going to be the economy, stupid, this time too?
I think so. I mean, we think about money in the pocket. What does it drive voters? Voters look at policy, but it's how they're feeling when they're voting. And guess what? It starts with the conversation where, the buck drops here. I guess money always talks, and that's people tend to listen.
Ryan Patel, thanks so much.